Welcome to another exciting webinar. Just when you thought things couldn't get any more confusing or chaotic in the college process after a really rough year, here we are talking about some new changes to the ACT. I'm Andy Lockwood from Lockwood College Prep, and with me is our celebrity head tutor, Marissa Yu. Hello, Marissa.
Hello, everybody.
So I think we should just get right into the changes. I know there's still a little bit that's up in the air as usual. Whenever there are changes, there's always a lot of questions that accompany those changes. But this webinar is really for anyone who's contemplating taking the ACT. So Marissa is gonna, I guess, share with us when the changes are due to take effect, what they are, and of course, how do you manage them? What do they mean for you? So, Marissa, when do these changes take place before you start talking about what they actually are?
So there's a little bit of a question as to when all of the changes will take place, but beginning in April of 2025, you will have the option of signing up for an online ACT that will be a shorter version of the current test. So currently, the test without the writing, which is the essay section, which is optional, it's about 3 hours. So the new shorter test will be about 2 hours because you can also now opt out of the science section, which a lot of people will be very happy to hear, because that is the number one complaint I hear about the ACT is students really don't like that science section. In April 2025, this will only be available on the online test. So if you're taking it as a paper test, it will still be the old version of the test, 3 hours. There's some speculation, some rumors, some ACT reps have said that in September 2025, all of the tests will be switched to the shorter version. That's not confirmed, but that's what people have heard from the ACT.
Well, I would assume that's going to be the case because in response to the digital SAT, we can certainly talk about that later. So I see some questions starting to come in. So if you have questions, this is a great opportunity to pop them in the chat there. Also, just say hi. Let us know where you are logging in from. That's always interesting for us to know what states and countries people find out about us and pick up. So let us know that we're coming in loud and clear also, and say hi in the chat and let us know where you are coming from. So, so the science thing, like why is science now optional? not optional entirely, but optional on the ACT. Why isn't the ACT following the science?
Well, if I just purely may speculate here, I think it's so that they can regain their market share. Science, like I said before, is the number one complaint I hear about the test, also it being really fast. And if we can base our students and take them as a sample for what's going on in the world as a large, I would say almost nobody is taking the ACT these days, at least not in our region. For a while, I was 50-50, sometimes even more ACT than SAT. These days, I have to basically beg people to take the ACT, and even then, most people will just go with the SAT because it's shorter and it doesn't have the science. So I can only imagine that this is the reason. Otherwise, they will be at risk of going out of business or just losing a lot of money.
Well, both the College Board, who makes the SAT, and the ACT, organization that does the ACT, have been hit pretty hard because of all the test optional policies, although there is a growing small reversal of those policies being allowed. More colleges are no longer test optional. But I think it's not too cynical to suggest that the reason that they're shortening the test and eliminating, I guess, the section that caused a lot of people to not take the ACT is purely for business purposes. But the whole science section thing was a little bit of a misnomer. That I learned that from you because there are science questions on the SAT, right?
There are, and the science section on the ACT is not really testing science. There's a very small number of questions that require some outside science knowledge. Some of it's really basic, like the freezing point of water is 0 degrees Celsius. It's more about reading the science charts and graphs and a little bit of passage paragraphs. It's really not, I wouldn't call it a science section. I would just call it maybe science themed reading or data section, but people get freaked out. They think they're bad at science. I haven't taken physics. I can't take the test. None of that is really true, but people still don't like it. It's also the last section, and I think that plays into it because by the time you get there, you're exhausted from the other sections.
So do you think the ACT won't have any sciencey questions anymore, or are they going to somehow stick them into the English section?
I think, well, interestingly, was it around COVID or maybe right before 2020, they made an announcement that they were going to add some science type questions into the reading section. There's always been a reading passage, but they were going to add charts and graphs. I'm not sure if that ever showed up on any test. So maybe they'll go back to that. But they're not eliminating the science section. They are simply making it optional.
Right.
So it's a little unclear how that's going to work. Looking at the wording they used in their press release, it does appear that your composite score will no longer include the science section, that your composite will now be, if you take that, digital test in April or the test in September of 2025. Just to make this clear, if you're a rising senior now, none of this affects you.
Okay, so for class of 2025 kids, proceed as you already were doing. Yeah. There's no change. But for 2026 kids
and beyond. Yeah, this is where you'll have this impact from this change. Okay. So it appears the English, math, and reading will now be your composite score, the average of those. And that if you take the optional science section, that's a separate score. And then if you take the optional writing section, that's also a separate score. Pretty much nobody takes the writing anymore.
Colleges don't really care about it either, so that's the reason. Yeah,
it just every year I look, and fewer schools even recommend it.
Yeah. So if you're just joining us and you have questions, we're talking about the changes to the ACT. So hello to Mike, to Julianne, who's a client of ours. Hello to Barbara, Bertha, Bill, and a few other people. So welcome. This is a good opportunity. This is going to be a short call because we're just sort of feeling out the new changes to the ACT. What is your recommendation for 2026 kids in terms of deciding whether they should take the ACT or not, whether they should, and then also whether they should take the bonus sections or one or both of the bonus sections, science and writing?
I think it all comes down to diagnostic testing. We can set you up with practice exams. I'll try to make a shorter version of the new version of the test whenever we have materials available to do that with. See how you do. First, compare that to how you score on the SAT, and then see how you do in the science section. If you have a strong score on the science section, or if I can see, okay, it's not the best, but I sense that you have the potential to make that a strong score, because I would say that's the section with the sharpest learning curve on the test, then why not take it? Why not add something that would strengthen your application? But if you're horrible at it and you hate it and it causes you immense stress, then I would imagine it's safe to.
Well,
I don't know.
Yeah. So, I mean, just to game this out. So two things that I thought of. Number one is if you're an ACT person in 2026 and you are, gunning for a top college, an Ivy or super competitive college, I'm pretty sure you're going to need to submit the science section because everyone else most likely will be doing that. And those colleges tend not to be test optional, or that they're the first ones to abandon the test optional option. So that's my guess, and again, we're peering to the future, but I think that's an educated guess. And then my second question, you may not know the answer to this, is do you have to decide, let's say you're taking the test and you've signed up to take the science test, but you blow it. can you undo it? I don't think you'll be able to.
I'm pretty sure you won't be able to, because like right now the writing section is optional, but you can't remove that writing section after you take the test.
But you can just delete the whole test after you take it.
Do they have that?
Yeah.
I'm not. Yeah, maybe the whole test.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the policies are on that.
Yeah, which I don't ever recommend, because most people don't do as poorly as they think they did.
It's usually the opposite. Usually the students who come to me and they say that they aced the test, they're the ones with the lower than expected scores. And the students that think that they bombed it, they call me all excited once the scores come out. I think the reason for that is like people are not good at knowing what they don't know. So you might see a question, think, oh, this is super easy. But meanwhile, you miss the whole point of it.
Well, to me, that's consistent with, how every parent, every dad thinks that their son is going to go pro in, whatever sport they're playing. It's an overestimation of kids' abilities.
Yeah, so I wouldn't suggest making a prediction of how you did unless something went terribly wrong, like a horror story. Then maybe cancel it.
Okay, all right. So I see a bunch of questions coming in here. Marissa, is there anything else you want to talk about in terms of the changes? You gave me like a 3-page outline here.
Sorry.
And then, well, I mean, so there's flexibility, right? You can choose whether it takes science or not.
Although now that you're talking about it, I wonder how much flexibility you really have.
Well, it's before you take it, I guess.
If you'll be expected to submit it to show that you have that academic commitment, maybe you don't have flexibility.
Well, it depends on where you're playing.
But it's shorter. That's a plus.
And it's shorter. 44 fewer questions, right? That's what you said?
Yeah, I mean, that's not super helpful. But if we base it on a pilot test that they put out in June, so they kind of piloted, I'm assuming, the same version of this test a few months ago. And people on the internet posted like how it was set up. So the original test, the current version of the test, like for English, for example, it's 75 questions in 45 minutes. Now it's 50 questions in 35 minutes. So not only is it shorter and you have fewer questions, but you also get more time per question, which is really the biggest part of this announcement, in my opinion, because that's always been the biggest difference between the SAT and the ACT, is that the ACT is really fast paced. That's the one thing that stops those middle of the road scoring students from getting a high score. They can't cope with the pace of the test. Now that that's gone, it's a little weird. I don't know how they're going to keep their score distribution the same. I would imagine it's going to be, you're going to have to get a higher percentage right to get those higher scores, because it's not possible that it's suddenly going to be the easier test, because then colleges obviously wouldn't find it valuable.
It's a fine line, because they don't want to lose market share to the SAT. Those, they're always competing with each other, but they still want to be valuable to the colleges that want you to submit tests. But so the bottom line, in terms of the biggest part of the announcement, that as you said, is that it's going to be not as fast paced of a test.
Yes, it won't be as fast paced.
In terms of important announcements, how would you compare this to like Trump announcing his vice presidential pick? Like,
I'm blocking politics out of my mind. Okay. I can't cope with it.
I forgot we were on live on the air here. Sorry. Okay.
I find this way more interesting and not horrifying.
Okay. Okay. So what do you think about? You sort of addressed this already, but what do you think about whether it's going to be easier or harder than the old ACT?
I think that the level will be the same, the level of difficulty of the questions and the material. And I think that the ACT did kind of say that. But I think, like I said, that you'll probably have to make fewer mistakes, a fewer percentage of mistakes to get that higher score. But also, I mean, it's the colleges that also determine what a good score is. So we don't even really know. Like maybe a 30 won't be a 30 anymore. Maybe a 30 will now be considered equivalent to a 32.
But don't they just rejigger things anyway? Like eventually, like the SAT seemed to do that. Like everyone did really poorly on the math. And
like they're going to feel it out.
The second one.
So the transition time is a really interesting time to take the test. Not only is the ACT kind of like making adjustments as you go, but also the colleges, So maybe there's a possible advantage to the students who are in this twilight zone of in-between time. Maybe they can go and get that score and it'll be like ranked higher than it will be ranked a year later once the colleges sort of figure out the results of this. But maybe it's the opposite. I don't know.
Yeah.
There's always a lot of uncertainty when there's a transition.
All right. So if you're just joining us, we're talking about the changes that are in effect really for a class of 2026 and younger kids, not 2025 kids. Just going down my list of questions here. Will it be adaptive like the SAT?
I do not believe it will be. All signs point to no.
Okay. Harder or easier than the SAT?
Well, that's a loaded question. I think the content...
From your list of questions. Come on.
I think the content will be easier.
Yeah.
I think it will feel easier to students. Will it be easier to get that high score? Probably not. Otherwise, this wouldn't be a really useful test.
I agree. What about bringing your own calculators or devices?
So it seems that if you take the digital version of the ACT, it looks like you're taking it on not your own device. I'm not sure if it's going to be provided by the ACT or provided by the testing centers, which traditionally are schools, but they were talking about at the conference over the summer opening up non-traditional testing centers like hotels and such.
Right.
I don't know, but it does seem like you're not taking it on your own device the way that most students take the digital SAT.
Okay.
But you can bring your calculator. I don't think that's going to change the calculator part.
But even the digital SATs are at schools for the most part, right? They're not at non-traditional places like hotels, or has that changed? Because New York was so hard to get it, Oh,
I think, no, they tried opening it up. They rented out a hotel room in California because California is the worst. There's a huge shortage of testing centers. People travel to out of state all the time. So they rented out like a big Marriott, and I think the people showed up and they canceled it during the day because there was some sort of conflict with the contract. Like they have their own internet provider, but then the Marriott would only let them use their vendor. So they had to cancel the test at the last minute.
Yeah.
So are they going to do that? I think that the rep at the conference I attended did say they were trying to, this is the SAT, trying to go into more non-traditional centers in the areas where there is a shortage of testing centers. Whether or not that will actually happen remains to be seen.
Yeah, every hotel requires that, by the way. You have to use their own everything, food and beverage and internet. And
they should have consulted with you.
Well, it's a profit center for the hotels, All right, practice material. Are there any plans about practice tests for the new the new ACT?
They have not announced that, but they really will have to give us some practice tests. The SAT give us 4. The ACT tends to be more generous with their practice tests, so maybe we'll get 5 or 6 from them. But they've said that there isn't going to be huge departure from the current type of material and type of questions that they use.
Okay.
So we have a wealth of old ACT material, and it's still going to be useful for practice. It might not be useful for scoring because now the timing is totally different and the scales will be off, but probably still really useful for practice.
All right, so go over the timing per section for English, math, reading, and then the now faux optional science.
So the current version, English is 75 questions and 45 minutes. The new version will have 50 questions in 35 minutes.
Okay.
The math currently has 60 questions and 60 minutes. The new version will have 45 questions in 50 minutes. It doesn't feel like a huge difference, but having like those extra 5 questions removed is pretty good.
Right.
The reading currently is 35 minutes for 40 questions. The new version will have 36 questions and 40 minutes. So the questions went down, but the minutes went up. Same for the science. Currently it's 35 minutes, 40 questions. Now it's 45 minutes for 40 questions. Yeah, and that I don't know if the writing will change, but nobody cares about that anyway.
Yeah, but it adds up. It leads to, I guess, less test taking fatigue and softer students, I guess.
I mean, I am having such a tough time convincing anybody to take the ACT, even if they score significantly better on it. They just convince their parents that the SAT is much better, because who doesn't want to get home an hour earlier?
Yeah, that's just another part of the decline of society, I guess. So, all right. So before we get to the Q&A and consider this last call for Q&A, if you're joining us today live, what is your advice in terms of different scenarios? Like how do you answer the question? Well, what should I do?
So, well, if you're a senior, right, just keep doing what you're doing. Nobody cares.
And that's the clear class of 2025.
Okay, yeah, sorry. I can't deal with the years for some reason. If you are going to be the class of 2026, you'll be in the transition zone. So I think you'll probably want to take 3 diagnostic tests, I'm sorry to say, but I would do a diagnostic SAT, a paper ACT, and a digital ACT to see how you fare on each. You want to take the test that you did better on. That plain and simple. Everyone else younger than that, you're going to have a simpler choice. You'll just have a practice ACT and a practice SAT, and you won't have too much of a choice. But I mean, you'll have the optional science. You should definitely take the science on a diagnostic to see how you do. If you do really well, take the science section.
Okay, good. All right, so I'm gonna pop the offer here for $100 off for our upcoming classes. Marissa, can you put in the coupon code
I've got the coupon code and links to everything.
Okay.
If I can press the right button, there we go.
Okay, good. And I'm going to just fire away some of these questions here in the lightning round.
Okay.
All right, so Mike Dorsey from St. Louis. Will the ACT be moving to digital only?
Eventually.
Okay. And you already talked about how they're abbreviating.
Wait, hold on. Okay, that's speculative. Because they've made a big deal about saying you right now, because you can take the digital ACT right now, and they make a big deal about how you can take it paper or digital. We're not going to force you into digital like the SAT. I very strongly suspect that by September 2025, or maybe the year later, that they're eventually going to transition entirely to digital.
All right. I will accept your amended answer that is speculative. Such a lawyer. Okay, so you covered this sort of indirectly. Bertha has a question. Which is best to take, the ACT or the SAT?
Who knows? Take a diagnostic test and we'll find out.
Right. Bill, shouldn't a prospective STEM major, like engineering, computer science, take the science section?
Well,
I would say yes. Yeah,
but this is an Andy question, but I think for sure.
Yeah, or the SAT. I mean, it's whatever you do better on, but definitely do not blow off science if you opt for the ACT. Julianne says, yes, science section is horrible. Okay.
I love that section.
Well, a lot of people don't. So
I know.
Everyone to each their own. I just want to unite us. Okay. I mean,
I think the science section is the easiest section to game.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
But if you go in without strategy, it's going to be a nightmare.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Rebecca, past client of yours, says, thanks for the heads up. Kalina enjoyed your prep class, and these changes might convince her to try a retake next summer. Interesting.
Oh, interesting.
Thea, if you did okay in the SAT, does it make sense to do the ACT to try to get a better score?
I would suggest just taking a practice ACT and comparing your scores. If you've been prepping for the SAT, your SAT should be higher than your ACT, even if you're better at the ACT. But if your score comes close, then that might be something to consider, especially if you're not close to your goal score.
All righty. Our colleague, Gary Heller, fellow attorney / college advisor. So many of us. We have to think that the most highly selective colleges will want students to take the science section. For them, it's not optional. Yeah.
I agree. They'll probably want the science.
Yeah. Let's see. Barbara, do you still have to take it at a testing center? I guess as of now.
Oh, I think that's the permanent plan. I don't think there's any plans on making this an at-home test. And there are graduate school exams that you can take at home, like the LSAT now. You can take at home.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I don't recommend it. It's a bad experience.
Okay.
So if that were an option, I still would tell people to go to the testing centers, unless you live in some crazy remote area.
By the way, for all you future attorneys out there, Marissa also tutors for the LSAT. Very, very well versed in many different areas.
That test has also changed. No more logic games.
Yeah, that's weird.
They took away the best part.
All right, Claire, can you super score the ACT or choose not to submit the optional portions? Well, A, super score, yes. I don't know why that would change, but B, I don't think you can. We talked about that. I don't think you can pull back the optional section once you took it.
They haven't told us anything about that. I would imagine not.
Yeah.
But super scoring has always been the choice of the college anyway that you're applying to. So I don't see why they would change that.
Okay, Lily, same questions above. Submitting your scores in general is optional, correct? Well, it is at many schools, that's 3/4 of the colleges, but that doesn't mean that will help you get in necessarily, because that just makes the rest of your application more important, more heavily weighted. Jen Herman, that's a friend of ours. Will the time factor changing on the ACT, with the time factor on the changing on the ACT, does this mean that the ACT and the SAT will be very similar?
Well, I mean, I think they're kind of similar now, but I don't think it's going to close the gap on the differences, really. I think the ACT is still more of a straightforward test where it leans more into testing, just like what do you know? What do you remember from school? The math, there's a wider array of math topics that could show up. The SAT is like trickier, trying to, they both have traps trying to get you into choosing the wrong answers and not choose the right answers, but the SAT does it more and better. So I think the ACT will still be the more straightforward of the tests.
Okay. Barbara asked about, well, I guess what we call adaptive. She's asking, will it be scaffolded like the SAT, where it gets easier or harder in the second sections? So right?
It does not appear to be the case.
Yeah. Okay. All right. People join late. We're gonna send out the replay for this, so I don't want to just go over stuff we already covered, just so I spare the people who are here when we started. Sally, we're from New York. From New York. My son is taking Marissa's SAT class.
Hello.
You offer assessments for students to decide which test is best, SAT or ACT? Of course.
Yes.
Yep.
And we use that language, which test is best.
Yeah, it's catching on. All the kids are using it. Barbara, do you recommend taking both the SAT and the ACT, and then based on results, do some formal prep?
Generally, I recommend taking a practice SAT and practice ACT, or taking our combination diagnostic test. I mean, I don't know if there's any harm to go and take the actual test cold, but it doesn't really seem like a worthwhile pursuit. Yeah. I think you can get just as valuable information taking the practice tests.
Interesting. All right, Mike has a question that I would have. This sounds like an Andy question. I wonder how the sale of the ACT private equity investors plays into these changes. Yeah,
probably quite a lot.
Probably, but this stuff happened even before that, right? Between the two, so it's just a continuation of changes, back and forth to pick up market share as that gets lost to the other tests. Okay, so Marissa, you posted the various links. And the discount code is CRUSH2024 for the $100 off. Barbara, I've heard you can see the biggest improvement with some prep for the science section compared to other sections. Is that what you meant when you said it's easiest to game?
So yeah, I usually see the biggest, fastest improvement in English, but I think prep, as far as strategy and not content, you're going to see the most improvement in science.
Okay. Okay, alrighty. Thea, if you take the SAT prep, then how much can you expect to increase your score?
Oh, that's another loaded question.
Yeah.
It depends on a lot of factors. It depends on where you're starting. Students who are going from an 1100 to a 1300, that's actually an easier jump than going from like a 1500 to a 1550. Like the higher you get up in the scale away from the average is about 1,000, the harder it is to move your score. So it's hard to give that advice, right? If you're starting at a 1500 versus starting at an 1100, we have very different expectations. It also depends on the student. You know, if your student is serious about preparing and they want to do this and they do the work and they pay attention in class and they follow my recommended study plan and use the materials that I provide for them, we have seen tremendous score increases. We've seen 300 points. But, you know, if you don't do any homework at all, and if you're looking at your phone instead of paying attention to class, and that is not only a problem for online classes, people zone out in person as well, then, you know, you might not see as much of an increase. So it really depends on the kid and where they're starting and how much prior preparation have they had. Is this their 6th time taking the SAT? You've probably maxed out a lot of your improvements at that point versus if you're taking it for the first time.
So just to summarize that, Marissa's guaranteeing a 1,600 and owe your money back, and she'll move in with you to tutor you.
Are you hearing 1550s from people a lot lately? I get a lot of people telling me that that is their goal for their child. 1550 is the magic number suddenly this year.
Because 1,600 is too aggressive?
I mean, way less than 1% of students achieve a 1550. Yeah. So this is like a really wild goal to me.
You see them? I mean, we see them. Yeah.
They happen, but I'm hearing it from a lot of people.
Okay. Gary Heller, very anti-law school. Sarah, did you say that you don't think for 2026 class that writing will, I guess means writing will be included? Yes.
I think she continued under.
Oh, you can be offered.
I think, I don't know. They should stop offering it because nobody takes it. But interestingly, if you're having trouble finding a seat at a testing center near you, you can switch to the with writing, and that often opens up availability because they give the writing and without writing in different rooms.
Good hack.
Yeah.
And colleges don't care about it anyway, so don't worry about it.
No, in fact, I've heard that sometimes you can talk to the testing coordinator the day of and just say like, hey, can we remove the writing and let me go? Sometimes they say yes.
Yeah, that's funny. All right. Yeah. Okay, let me I think we're almost here at the end. So let's consider this final last call as opposed to first last call. So get your questions in before we wrap up here. Barbara's asking, I'm sorry. So Sally wants to know when the next ACT is. So that's all published on the ACT website, act.org.
Yeah. And if you have an email from me, I link them in my signature, but the next one is in September. We just had one on Saturday. So that was the summer one. Next one's going to be in September, right after Labor Day, I think.
Yeah. So depending on when you're watching, it's like we're doing this live on July 17th, but they're offered basically every other month for most of the year.
Yeah, and you can always just Google like ACT registration dates, and it's going to be the first link that shows up.
I would go to the ACT website itself. No, I wouldn't go to any other site. Gary says, I once had a parent say she only got a 1390, right?
I've heard worse than that.
Well, I was talking to a client last night. This is going to make me sound ridiculous. I was talking to a client last night who has like a 1470 or 1480. And the parents are like, is that a good score? And I'm like, well, that depends on where you're applying, because at 99% of the colleges in the country, that's a great score. But if you apply to MIT, it's like you have a learning disability. And the mom's like, it's so funny. I'm like, well, I'm just trying to make a point. I'm not trying to make fun of people with learning disabilities, but it's relative, right? So 1390 is a great score. It's probably in the top 3% or something of the country, but it's not good for an Ivy or similar school. Mike is asking about science. 40 questions in 45 minutes, right? For the science.
Let me check my notes. I don't have, so 40 questions in 45 minutes. So that's interesting now, more than a minute per question.
Yeah, got it. All right, that's the optional science science section.
Yeah.
So I think that's it. Anything we didn't cover that you think we should cover?
I just want to make a note that the timing and number of questions per section is speculative right now. The ACT has not made that an official announcement. This is from what I've gathered. So again, not 100% verified, that they had a pilot test a few months ago. And that was the breakdown that I've heard from the pilot test. So I'm imagining it's going to be the same as the pilot test. So take that with whatever grain of salt you want, but I would say it's probably going to be that or close.
I am shocked at how cavalier you're being about this, but I still appreciate it.
Okay.
So you have that going for you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, guys. So if you have any questions, you have the information about our courses. You see Marissa is very thorough and up to date and on the latest breaking news that has to do with ACT and SAT test prep. So feel free to reach out if you're watching this either, after we wrap up or anytime in the future. Thanks a lot, Marissa, for doing this. And everyone have a great night.
Great night, guys. Take care.